The air in Victoria Whitman's Beverly Hills mansion, usually thick with the scent of lilies and old money, was instead permeated tonight by an acrid undertone of thinly veiled condescension. It clung to the expensive upholstery, settled on the crystal flutes, and most acutely, emanated from Victoria herself as she surveyed the bustling living room. Her charity gala, ostensibly for underprivileged youth, felt more like a stage for her own inflated sense of benevolence, a convenient backdrop against which to display her effortless superiority. When her gaze, sharpened by years of unchallenged privilege, landed on Diego, her maid's son, serving canapés with quiet dignity, an idea, both cruel and amusing, sparked in her mind. "Come here, boy. How about showing me how you play chess in the slums?" Victoria's voice, perfectly modulated for public charity but laced with an unmistakable sneer, cut through the genteel murmur of conversation. The words hung in the air, a deliberate barb, designed to prick and shame. She watched, a flicker of sadistic satisfaction in her eyes, as Diego's mother, Carmen, stiffened, her knuckles white around the silver tray. 20 years. 20 years Carmen had scrubbed Victoria's floors, polished her silver, raised her own son alone on a pittance, only to witness this. The familiar sting of injustice, a dull ache that had become a constant companion, flared into a sharp, indignant heat within Carmen's chest. Diego, at 17, was a master of stillness. His dark eyes, usually reserved, scanned the room, not just the faces of the laughing guests, but the subtle shifts in their postures, the way their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. He understood silence. He understood the unspoken language of power and contempt that permeated this opulent space. Victoria, perched regally on a leather armchair, gestured toward the gleaming Italian marble chessboard, an artifact of decorative luxury rather than serious play. "I bet he can at least move the pieces," she quipped, her voice dripping with mock encouragement. A ripple of discreet laughter followed, hushed behind $1,000 champagne glasses. Mr. Hamilton, a man whose hotel chain spanned continents, leaned into his wife with a snide whisper. "I bet he doesn't even know the knight moves in an L shape." The laughter swelled, a wave of superiority crashing over Diego. But Diego remained motionless, his fingers unconsciously twitching as if tracing moves on an invisible board. Beneath the forced calm, a profound internal shift was occurring. He heard their jokes, their thinly veiled insults, and instead of shame, a cold, focused resolve began to harden within him. They saw a slum kid, a boy meant for entertainment, for humiliation. What they couldn't see was the 8 years of solitary devotion, the countless hours hunched over borrowed library books, the cracked computer screen in the dim light of his small room where he devoured games by Kasparov, Fischer, and Colson. They didn't know about the 200 openings he had memorized, the 50 defenses he could recite by heart, the waking at 5 a.m. to solve tactical problems before school. This wasn't just a chess game to him, it was a crucible, an arena where he could finally shatter their preconceived notions, not with anger, but with overwhelming, undeniable skill. "Of course, Mrs. Whitman," Diego finally responded, his voice betraying no hint of the turmoil within, a calmness that made some of the guests exchange curious glances. "It will be my pleasure." Victoria beamed, oblivious, settling in like a queen awaiting her gladiators. "Excellent. I bet you've never played on a board like this, have you? Genuine Italian marble. Each piece worth more than, well, you know." State Representative Jennifer Mills, observing the scene, asked tentatively, "Victoria, are you sure this isn't cruel? The poor boy is going to be humiliated." Victoria merely scoffed, adjusting her diamond earrings. "Nonsense. It's a learning opportunity. He'll tell his friends he played chess in a real mansion." What Victoria Whitman, and indeed all of them, fundamentally failed to grasp was that Diego wasn't there to be humiliated. He was there to write a new narrative, piece by agonizing piece, on the 64 squares of that very board. He was preparing not just for a game, but for a reckoning, a profound redefinition of respect and worth that would begin tonight, born from the very prejudice they sought to inflict. Victoria, with the practiced flourish of someone accustomed to effortless victories, settled into her chair, arranging her white pieces with theatrical grandeur. "I always play white, dear. It's a family tradition," she declared, her tone dismissing any notion of a fair draw, asserting her inherent superiority even over the rules of the game itself. Diego, a stark contrast in his quiet dignity, simply nodded. His hands, steady and precise, positioned his black pieces, each one finding its perfect center on the marble square, as if this opulent board were merely one of hundreds he had conquered in his mind's eye. There was a meticulousness to his movements that made Mr. Hamilton, a man who prided himself on his own amateur chess prowess, frown almost imperceptibly. "Let's make this interesting," Victoria announced to her captivated audience, her lips curling into a condescending smile. "If the boy manages to give me even one scare, I'll donate $1,000 to, I don't know, some public school." Laughter rippled through the room again, a sound that usually tightened Carmen's chest with resentment. But this time, Diego looked up, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. A shiver, cold and knowing, traced its way down Carmen's spine. She knew that smile. It was the same quiet confidence her son had worn as a child when underestimated, the same knowing look that had preceded his effortless mastery of any challenge. Victoria opened with a conservative pawn move, e4. Indian king, dear. "A classic opening we learned at Harvard," she explained, her voice saccharine, as if teaching a child to tie his shoes. Diego's response was instantaneous. C5, the Sicilian defense. An awkward silence descended upon the room. This was not the timid move of someone who barely knew the pieces. It was the sharp, confident counter of someone deeply steeped in theory. "Interesting," Congresswoman Mills murmured, leaning forward, her professional curiosity piqued. Victoria hesitated, a beat too long, just enough for Diego to intuit that her knowledge was rote, learned by memorization rather than true understanding. She played NF3, a move born of ingrained pattern, likely from a social club's casual game, not strategic insight. As Victoria pondered her next move, a brief, poignant journey through time unfolded in Diego's mind. 8 years earlier, at just 9, he'd salvaged a torn chess book from the library trash. "Mijo, why do you want to learn that?" his mother had asked, utterly exhausted after a double shift. "To be like the rich kids, Mom. They always say they're smarter than us." Carmen, earning a mere $600 a month, couldn't afford lessons, a computer, anything. But the public library became Diego's sanctuary. Every day after school, he walked 3 kilometers, poring over dusty books, dissecting historical games no one else touched. In the silent, early hours of the morning, when Carmen worked double shifts, Diego analyzed the masters, Kasparov, Fischer, Colson, their genius seeping into his very being through the glow of a broken, self-repaired computer. He had absorbed their brilliance, not as mere knowledge, but as a deep, intuitive understanding of the game's soul. Victoria finally moved d3, a timid, safe choice that betrayed her conservative nature, both on the board and in life. She preferred controlled positions, where social class could guarantee victory. Diego responded with NC6, developing with purpose, each move executed in less than 5 seconds, as if following a mental script he had rehearsed 1,000 times. "Our little boy is moving too fast," Victoria commented, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "In real chess, you think before you play." It was then that Diego made his first psychological maneuver. He paused, feigned deep contemplation for a full 15 seconds, then played g6, preparing the bishop's fiancé. It looked like an instinctive, amateur move, yet it was the opening note of a complex strategic symphony that would unfold over 10 more moves. "Ah, you see." Victoria turned triumphantly to her guests. "He doesn't have the patience to think." Typical. But Mr. Hamilton, who had played chess at university decades ago, recognized the subtle pattern. "Victoria, this boy is setting up a fast dragon." "Eh, what?" she replied, annoyance coloring her voice. "It's a variation of the Sicilian, quite sophisticated." Victoria looked at the board with a new, unsettling tension in her shoulders. Nonsense. He must have seen it in a movie. Yet, as the subsequent moves unfolded, an undeniable, unsettling truth began to take shape. Diego wasn't merely responding to her moves, he was dictating the rhythm of the game. Every piece he developed occupied its exact, preordained square, creating a harmony that transformed the marble board into a visual symphony, a testament to a mind far beyond what anyone in that room had anticipated. Carmen, watching from the corner, felt her heart pound with a mixture of dread and fierce pride. She had known Diego was good, but she had never seen him unleash this level of calculated, psychological dominance. For the first time in 20 years of working in that house, she saw a flicker of fear in Victoria Whitman's eyes. The dawning horror of discovering that perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't as special as she had always believed. Each new attempt by Victoria to impose humiliation only served to fuel a silent, formidable strength within Diego, a power forged in the very furnace of the injustice she sought to inflict. What those privileged people didn't know was that every act of contempt was signing their own sentence, written on the 64 squares that would soon become the stage for one of the greatest social humiliations Beverly Hills had ever witnessed. Diego's 10th move was a quiet detonation. Mr. Hamilton, reaching for his whiskey glass, choked as he recognized the pattern unfolding on the board. The boy had sacrificed a pawn, a seemingly innocent move, but to any experienced player, it screamed of a deadly trap being meticulously set. "Victoria," Hamilton whispered urgently, his voice strained, "this boy is no amateur." But Victoria, blinded by her monumental need to prove her superiority, simply waved off the warning. "Relax, dear. He must have memorized a few moves from the internet. I'll be done with this in 5 minutes." The words were an incantation, a desperate attempt to conjure a reality where her dominance remained unchallenged. That's when Diego did something truly unexpected. With a calm that was almost unnerving, he rose from his chair and walked across the plush carpet to Carmen, who stood watching everything from the corner, her hands clasped tightly together, a silent sentinel of dignity amidst the glittering chaos. "Mom," he said, his voice low, yet it echoed with startling clarity through the tense silence of the room. "Remember when you said that one day I would show these people who we really are?" Carmen nodded, her eyes, usually downcast in Victoria's presence, now shimmering with unshed tears. She remembered perfectly. It was the day Diego turned 15, and she hadn't even had enough money for a cake. He had found her crying in their small kitchen, overwhelmed by the crushing weight of their poverty, and had promised her, with a fierce, childish certainty, that one day he would change everything. The weight of that promise, carried silently for years, now hung palpably in the air. "That boy has more class than all of us put together," Congresswoman Mills murmured to her husband, her champagne flute forgotten, her gaze fixed on the quiet, profound interaction between mother and son. Victoria, her fingers drumming impatiently on the table, broke the spell. "Can we continue the game? I have other commitments today." Diego returned to the board, but something had irrevocably shifted in his demeanor. He was no longer merely the shy teenager invited for entertainment. He was a young man who carried the cumulative burden of years of sacrifice, of secret studies, of a determination forged in adversity and fueled by the raw, undeniable love for his mother. Diego's 11th move was executed with surgical precision, a move that made Victoria's brow furrow for the first time with genuine confusion, then dawning dread. He had created a double threat. If she protected her king, she would lose her queen. If she protected her queen, she would be checkmated in 3 moves. That's not possible," Victoria muttered, her eyes frantically scanning the board, searching for an escape that simply wasn't there. For the first time since the match began, her carefully constructed composure began to crumble. That's when Hamilton, his voice laced with a mixture of awe and grim satisfaction, delivered the undeniable truth. "Victoria, you're being outplayed by a kid who's probably never set foot in a formal chess club in his life." While Victoria desperately tried to find a way out of her dilemma, Diego allowed himself a moment to observe every face in the room. Congresswoman Mills had stopped drinking champagne, leaning forward, utterly fascinated. The hotel chain owner had put his cell phone aside. Even Hamilton's wife, who had been idly leafing through a fashion magazine, was now paying full, rapt attention to the unfolding drama. Carmen knew that look on her son's face. It was the same one he had at 12 when he first discovered the chess section at the public library, the same look he wore for 5 hours straight, hunched over historical games on a slow, broken computer, the same look that made him wake at 5 in the morning to solve tactical problems before school. It was the look of pure, unadulterated focus, unburdened by ego or expectation. Victoria finally made a move, a desperate, futile attempt to escape the meticulously woven trap. But it was too late. Diego had calculated that possibility 6 moves ago. Check, he said simply, moving his queen to a position that offered 3 different, undeniable winning continuations. The silence in the room was deafening, punctuated only by the faint ticking of Victoria's $15,000 wall clock. Victoria stared at the board, then at Diego, then back at the board. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from a contained rage at the horrifying realization that she was being systematically destroyed by someone she considered inherently inferior. "You must have seen that sequence somewhere," she said, her voice higher than normal, laced with a desperate, childish petulance. "No one learns that on their own." Diego smiled, for the first time, a genuine smile that held a quiet triumph. "You're right, I learned it from Garry Kasparov." "Kasparov taught you?" Hamilton asked incredulously. "Not personally," Diego replied, moving a piece to what was clearly the final, crushing move. "But I studied all his documented games. 1,803, to be exact. He used this particular sequence against Karpov in 1984, Game 23 of the World Championship." Victoria looked around the room, searching the faces of her guests for support, for validation, for the usual or she commanded. But what she found was something she had never seen directed at her before: silent disapproval. For the first time in her life, the people around her were not impressed by her performance. They were judging her, and finding her utterly, humiliatingly lacking. Carmen stepped forward then, a figure of quiet strength, and for the first time in 20 years, she looked Victoria Whitman directly in the eye, without lowering her gaze. "Mrs. Whitman," Carmen said, her voice firm and clear, cutting through the stunned silence. "My son woke up every day at 5 in the morning to study before school. He walked 6 miles to the public library because we couldn't afford internet. When I worked double shifts, he stayed up all night solving chess problems by candlelight because our electricity was cut off." The room was utterly silent now, the air thick with unspoken shame. Diego looked at his mother, a profound mixture of love and fierce determination in his eyes, a look that made some of those present avert their gazes, uncomfortable with the raw, undeniable truth. "Checkmate," Diego said softly, placing his queen in the final, unassailable position. Victoria stared at the board for a long moment, as if expecting the pieces to magically rearrange themselves, to undo the irreversible. When her eyes finally lifted, they met Diego's unruffled calm. But now, everything in the dynamic of the room had fundamentally shifted. The guests no longer looked at Diego as mere entertainment. They looked at him as someone who had just rewritten all their assumptions about talent, class, and merit. And they looked at Victoria with a mixture of embarrassment and disappointment she had never, in her gilded life, experienced before. That was luck," she muttered, her voice trembling, all previous confidence utterly gone. "He must have memorized that specific sequence somewhere." Hamilton rose from his chair, walking over to the board. "Victoria, that boy just executed a variation of the Sicilian that even I didn't know, and I've been playing this game for 40 years. Congresswoman Mills, ever the shrewd politician, pulled out her cell phone and began recording discreetly. She immediately recognized the viral value of this moment, a prejudiced millionaire being utterly humiliated by a prodigy she had so grievously underestimated. "I don't accept that," Victoria shrieked, standing abruptly, knocking over a few pieces in her fury. "Something's wrong here. No one learns to play like that on their own. Someone trained him specifically to humiliate me." Diego remained seated, watching her with that same unruffled calm, a quiet observer of her spectacular unraveling. "Would you like a rematch?" he offered, his voice devoid of malice, yet carrying an undeniable edge of challenge. "I can play with anyone here, or all of them at once, if you prefer." The comment caused a nervous murmur among the guests. It sounded impossible, yet after what they had just witnessed, no one dared to doubt him. "You're being arrogant now," Victoria retorted, her face red with anger and humiliation. "A boy from the slums doesn't talk to his superiors like that." That's when Carmen stepped forward, and for the first time in 2 decades, she looked Victoria Whitman directly in the eye, without flinching, without deference. "Mrs. Whitman," Carmen said, her voice firm and clear, My son is not from the slums. We are from a working-class community, and he is not being arrogant. He is being honest about his abilities, something you clearly cannot do about yours." The tension in the room ratcheted up exponentially. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, realizing they were witnessing something much bigger than a simple chess match. Victoria turned to Carmen with raw fury. "How dare you speak to me that way? Have you forgotten your place in this house?" "No," Carmen replied calmly, her gaze unwavering. "I remembered my worth." Hamilton intervened, clearly uncomfortable. "Victoria, perhaps we should recognize that the young man is truly talented and—" Victoria laughed bitterly, a harsh, humorless sound. "Talented? Don't you understand? This was set up. Someone trained him specifically to make me look like an idiot in my own home." Diego finally stood up. When he spoke, his voice carried a maturity that silenced all the adults present. "Mrs. Whitman, do you want to know the truth? I wasn't trained to humiliate you. I spent the last 8 years studying chess because I dreamed of playing against people who respected the game. People who understood that talent has no color, no social class, or last name." He paused, looking at each person present, his gaze steady and piercing. "When you invited me to play how you play in the slums, I thought I would finally have a chance to show that I deserved respect. But now I realize that you never wanted a fair match. You wanted a show of humiliation." Congresswoman Mills, no longer recording, watched the scene with absolute fascination. "How old are you, kid?" 17, Diego replied. "And how long have you been playing seriously?" 8 years. Mills looked at Victoria with an expression that mixed disbelief and profound disapproval. "Victoria, you've just been defeated by a self-taught teenager. A teenager whose family you employ. A teenager you invited to play as a joke." Victoria felt the crushing weight of every gaze in the room, and for the first time in her life, they were not looks of admiration or envy. They were looks of judgment. I didn't know he played seriously," she tried to defend herself, but her voice sounded weak, even to her own ears. "The question isn't whether he played seriously," Hamilton said, clearly irritated. "The question is that you invited him to play assuming he would be easily defeated. Why? Because he's your maid's son. Because he's black. Because he doesn't have money." The silence that followed was devastating. Diego calmly arranged the pieces on the board, each move executed with precision. "Thanks for the game, Ms. Whitman. It was educational." When he finished, he turned to his mother. "Mom, can we go? I have school tomorrow." Carmen nodded, removing the apron she had worn to serve the guests. But before leaving, she turned to Victoria one last time. "Mrs. Whitman, thank you for showing me that my son deserves to be in much better places than this." As mother and son walked toward the door, Congresswoman Mills called out, "Diego, are you interested in scholarships? I know some universities that would love to have someone with your talent." Diego stopped and smiled, his first genuine smile of the night. "Very interested, Mills handed him her card. "Call me on Monday." Victoria watched, motionless, still processing how she had lost complete control of the situation in less than an hour. She had gone from respected hostess to the woman who had underestimated a prodigy out of sheer prejudice, in front of important witnesses. When the door closed behind Diego and Carmen, the remaining guests looked at each other in awkward silence. Hamilton was the first to stand up. "I think I'd better leave too." One by one, the guests began to depart, offering only cold farewells and disapproving glances. Victoria was left utterly alone in the room, still staring at the board where her arrogance had been systematically destroyed by a teenager she considered inferior. But what she didn't know was that tonight would be just the first move in a much bigger game. One where Diego Santos would rewrite not only his own history but question the entire system of privilege that people like Victoria Whitman took for granted. As Diego walked home with his mother under the vast, indifferent expanse of the Beverly Hills stars, he clutched the card that Congresswoman Mills had given him. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a tangible promise, a portal to a future that, hours ago, had seemed an impossible dream. In his mind, he was no longer merely calculating chess moves, but the strategic, intricate steps of a much larger game. The game of proving that true nobility cannot be bought with money but is earned with character, forged in adversity, and revealed through action. The humiliation inflicted upon him, the casual cruelty of Victoria Whitman, had been a catalyst, hardening his resolve into something unbreakable. 6 months later, the hallowed halls of Stanford University welcomed Diego Santos, a full scholarship student in engineering. Congresswoman Mills had kept her word, not only connecting him with academic opportunities but opening an entire world of people who recognized talent regardless of social background, people who saw beyond the superficiality of wealth and skin color. The video of that fateful night in Beverly Hills had, as Mills shrewdly predicted, gone viral. 3 million views in 2 weeks, not because someone had covertly recorded the match, but because Congresswoman Mills herself had shared the story on her social media, meticulously framing it to turn Diego into a symbol of overcoming adversity and Victoria into a cautionary example of what not to do when you possess privilege. "Young prodigy destroys prejudiced millionaire in chess" was the headline that circulated across the internet, sparking a torrent of online commentary. "What a shame for that woman. And that boy deserves every opportunity in the world," dominated the response sections. Victoria Whitman became persona non grata in her own meticulously curated social circles. The golf club, after sustained pressure from other members, revoked her membership. 3 prominent charities, fearing reputational damage, quietly removed her name from their event invitations and donor lists. Even Hamilton, her friend of decades, began to conspicuously avoid her at social gatherings. "Victoria has always been arrogant, but I never imagined she could be so cruel," Hamilton's wife remarked during a dinner in Malibu, a sentiment that echoed through their former friends' conversations. To humiliate a child like that in front of everyone. The psychological torment for Victoria was perhaps the most acute. It wasn't the public scorn, though that stung. It was the dawning, inescapable realization that Diego had never sought revenge or exposure. He had simply played chess, something he did naturally, with a mastery developed through years of quiet, solitary dedication. The profound, inescapable humiliation she felt was self-inflicted, a direct and inevitable consequence of her own deeply ingrained prejudiced assumptions. Her empire of status and social currency had been systematically dismantled, not by external forces, but by the very moral void she herself inhabited. Meanwhile, Carmen, Diego's steadfast mother, found her own quiet vindication. She was promoted to cleaning supervisor at a 5-star hotel in Santa Monica, a job that paid 3 times as much and came with full medical benefits. It wasn't charity, it was recognition of the unwavering professionalism she had always demonstrated, finally valued by employers who saw beyond prejudice, who understood true worth. Diego, ever forward-looking, channeled his passion into purpose. He founded a free online chess program that connected young people from underserved communities with college mentors. In less than 6 months, 1,200 children were learning not just how to move pieces, but fundamental life strategies that no formal classroom could teach: critical thinking, patience, foresight, and resilience. "Chess taught me that every person has unique strategic value," Diego explained during an interview with CNN, his calm demeanor still striking. "Victoria Whitman taught me that some people need to lose everything to learn what really matters." When asked if he held a grudge against the woman who tried to humiliate him, Diego smiled with the same serene calm he had shown on that fateful night. "Grudges are pieces that only get in the way of the game. I prefer to focus on what I can build." Victoria watched that interview alone in her mansion, now echoing with the silence of abandoned friendships. For the first time, she truly understood what she had lost that night, not just a chess match, but the opportunity to be a better person, to connect with genuine talent and humanity rather than dismiss it. Hamilton had called once after the incident, a brief, uncomfortable conversation. "Victoria," he'd said, his voice flat, "you created that situation." Diego just responded with a class you should have shown from the beginning. The lesson echoed far beyond Beverly Hills. Diego proved that true nobility does not come from surnames or bank accounts but from character forged in adversity and demonstrated through actions. He turned prejudice into purpose, the humiliation of others into his own extraordinary growth. Today, when Diego looks to the future, he sees no limitations imposed by others, but possibilities created by his own unwavering determination. Victoria had tried to diminish him, to make herself feel bigger, but she ended up revealing that true greatness is measured by the ability to lift others up, not tear them down. Carmen proudly framed a photo of Diego receiving his first academic honorable mention at Stanford. On the wall next to it, a certificate from the chess program that had already impacted thousands of young people. Achievements that no money could buy, and no prejudice could steal. The best revenge, as Diego discovered, is not to destroy those who try to diminish you. It is to build something so extraordinary that their mediocrity becomes irrelevant by comparison. Victoria Whitman tried to make him entertainment, but Diego Santos became inspiration. And that difference defines not only who wins at chess, but who wins in life.